Hi, everybody. Welcome to number 5 virtual table with my guests, Meiklejohn and McIntyre-Lahner. Megan is, well, we first met Megan. She was a panelist at a sustainable fashion summit that the predecessor company to Wearwool New London, which was called Till Biofashion Tech, bit of a mouthful, put on, and Megan was on the panel about materials. And she has roamed the earth looking for sustainable fiber and is now a sustainability product manager in the fashion world. She can talk about that. And McIntyre-Lahner is the owner of Olympia Farm in Guilford, where she raises Romney sheep, both for their wool and their lamb. And we'll talk about being a dual purpose farmer with her. So we all cooked lamb barbacoa tacos, quite an adventure. This was inspired by a Cook's Table video on Christina Martinez and her South Philly barbacoa restaurant, which Bon Appetit considers to be one of the best restaurants in America. So we didn't do it in a pit, we did it in a Dutch oven, but we made some amazing lamb barbacoa tacos. So I wanted to start by asking both Megan and Ann, how did it go? How did it go? I know Megan is still in process, but you can talk about what you did.
Sure. Yeah. It's still going for me. I started early this morning, and I'm a big fan of braising, so I was pretty excited to make this recipe. And I haven't done such an involved recipe in a while. The ingredients, some I've never even heard of. I didn't know you could cook with avocado leaves, so that was pretty exciting. I was happy that I found the ingredients. But anyway, yeah. So it's been in the oven for 3 hours. I took it out. I tried it. The taste is amazing. It's really, really good, but it wasn't quite shredding the way I wanted it to. So I put it back in the oven, and I'm hoping maybe another hour. Then I'll take it out again and go from there. And then I have some people coming over tonight, so that's what's on the menu.
Hey, when you put it in do you cook it in a Dutch oven?
Yeah.
Did you put aluminum foil on the pot before the lid?
I didn't, and I saw that you did that in your video after I already stuck it in the oven.
Yeah, because I think the tighter the seal on this particular thing, the more soft the lamb's going to be at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and when they do it in a pit, they actually seal the cover of the pot with clay.
Oh, wow.
So they're basically getting a total, no steam is getting out. So that's interesting. And I did 3 batches of it. So I've done some without the foil and some with it. And it does make it softer if you use the foil.
Yeah, it makes a difference. Yeah, maybe after this, I'll put some foil on there.
Yeah. And what about you? How'd it go?
Well, it went great. It went surprisingly well. And, Kip, I took you at your word. You said, you can riff on this as long as you stick to lamb. Right. And so, the first.
I had to say that because one of the guests in our first thing actually switched to beef. And I said, no, I never.
No, right. Well, the first place I realized I was going to have to riff was at the grocery store when I was unable to find some of the ingredients. One of the chilies, which I hadn't heard of before, I couldn't find. So I Googled it, and it said as an alternative, I could use one of the other kinds of chilies in the recipe. So I did that. I also couldn't find maguey leaves, banana leaves, or avocado leaves. But I would call myself a cook more than a chef. And I thought, you know what? Number one, with lamb and chili peppers and onion and orange, it's got to be at least okay. So I decided to punt. I also did 2 other things slightly differently. Although I do have a Dutch oven, the shoulder I had was a little bit smaller than what was called for. And I just felt like my Dutch oven was so big, everything would kind of disappear in it. So I thought, you know what? Let's try the crock pot. So although I did brown it in a cast iron skillet, I then put it in a crock pot. So I knew that was going to give me a really good seal. So I did not put aluminum in the crock pot because my crock pot has a great seal. And then finally, instead of using farmer's cheese, I live on a dairy. So we don't make sheep cheese, but we make goat cheese. And my husband makes a really good pepper infused fresh goat cheese.
Wow.
So I took our fresh pepper goat cheese and shredded that over the top.
Wow.
And I'm pretty darn happy with the results.
Right. Wow. Yeah, one of the things I used a little piece of banana leaf that came with the Mexican cheese just to get a little of that flavor. One didn't have either banana or maguey, and one had maguey leaves. But did you ever see the movie Spinal Tap, where they designed this? They want a prop of Stonehenge, right? And they give this design to the fabricator on the back of a napkin, but they mix up, you know, the apostrophe is feet and the quote is inches, and they get them mixed up. So the guy thinks they want to do it in inches, right? And so he comes back with this tiny little statue of Stonehenge for this rock band, right? It's ridiculous. Well, I've been on a hunt for maguey plants, and this is kind of what I got, you know, my version of Stonehenge. But and I guess at some point, maybe 3 years from now, I'll have maguey leaves. But what I did for one of them, I took all these leaves off this little plant and put them at the bottom, and it gave a little bit of the maguey flavor. But one of the recipes that I drew from gave a recipe for salsa verde to go with the lamb barbacoa tacos. So this go round, I used it, and it called for these, which are chinequiles. And I don't know if you can see them, but they're the red agave worm. They're the worm that's in the bottom of the tequila bottle. And they toast them, and you just throw it in with the tomatillos and the jalapenos and garlic and the rest of the salsa verde. And it gives it a little, it just kind of an earthy undertone. Frankly, they taste a little bit like shrimp, but you know, so I did that. And I also did a cilantro lime avocado crema with it. And then I also, since it's spring in Connecticut, we have ramps, which are wild leeks. I put some of those, pickled some of those and put them on top. So
Wow.
That's what I ended up with. Here's what it, you can kind of see it. This is what it looks like. But
that's beautiful.
Yeah. So anyway, great adventure. And
can you see mine?
Yeah, wow.
That looks good.
Cool.
I'm going to try not to eat it while we're talking.
So, you know, there is out there in the world this notion that we shouldn't eat red meat. And I'm interested in the take that you have, both given your connections to the world of wool and lamb, as to why lamb versus beef. If you're going to eat red meat, why lamb is the meat to eat. Do you have a point of view on that? Either of you?
We also raise beef.
Okay.
So, you know, lamb is so delicious. Americans don't understand lamb as well as people do in so many countries. And when, you know, I grew up in an English-Irish family, literally straight off the boat. And for us, lamb was a roast leg of lamb, very well cooked with mint jelly. And, you know, I can understand why that's kind of a turnoff, if not done really well. When I started cooking with garlic and olive oil and learning all the different ways to bring out the flavor of lamb, I discovered a new taste sensation. I mean, it's absolutely delicious and versatile. And then with this recipe today, actually squeezing orange juice and using orange slices to cook, it brought out another dimension of lamb I'd never tried before. So, you know, when you buy local meat, Yes, it can be beef. Yes, it can be other things, but let's talk about lamb. When you buy local lamb, it's a very different taste experience than something that's traveled halfway across the world. It's also a very different experience regarding sustainability. Because if you live in Connecticut and you're buying from someone in Guilford or Ledyard or Norwich or East Hampton, you know, I'm just naming some of the places where my fellow shepherds live, you know, that's been raised locally. Small farms generally are raising well, raising with care, raising on grass or a combination of grass and grain. Kip, I think you and I've had a couple conversations about one thing that we do as far as sustainability goes is there are a lot of microbreweries around, and they use human quality grain. They cook it to make their wort, and then they discard the brewer's grains when they're finished. And we found that some of the local microbreweries were paying to have their leftover grains carted away to a garbage dump. And we were paying many thousands of dollars a year to buy grain designed for sheep and goats. And we got together with some of the microbreweries, and we now keep their grains out of the dump. And they keep our sheep and goats chubby and happy and well-fed, and all in a really sustainable way. So there are different ways that lamb can be sustainable. Partly it's local, partly it's how they're fed, and it's also when you buy from a local farm, it helps your local community to thrive.
Yeah, there's a couple things there, and Megan, I want you to jump in too. But one is, you know, this grass-fed versus grain-fed. In Connecticut, you can't be 100% grass-fed because we just don't have a long enough growing season. I mean, I don't know where besides New Zealand you could get, Megan would know, where you could get 100% grass-fed, but during the winter, you have to supplement the hay with some grain. And I just think it's so cool that you use the spent malt from the microbrewery as a feedstock. When Megan and I were visiting your farm like a year and a half ago, was right when your husband was bringing the bringing in the barley, right? Yeah, so that was cool, and it clearly the sheep love it. They were just gobbling it up. So, and the other thing about sustainability to me with it, if you are pasturing your sheep, you are sequestering carbon, right? Even if you're only doing it during the growing season, you're still sequestering carbon. And when they eat that grass, they're taking up carbon, and that's sequestering carbon in their fleece and ultimately the garments that are made from them. So, to me, that's part of the sustainability issue. But the other piece is, as I understand it, it's pretty difficult to make a go of it if you only raise sheep for wool. You need to be dual purpose. You need to be raising sheep for lamb and possibly for milk, but certainly for lamb. And if you want to wear wool, you need to eat lamb, basically. With all deference to those who choose to be vegetarians, some of us meat eaters need to choose to eat lamb if we want there to be wool. I mean, to me, that's the basic concept. Megan, your thoughts on all that?
Well, going back to the first question around just around meat and should we eat meat, and I don't know if I have much of a preference around what types of meats that people eat. But I think just in general, diversity is always leads to resilient outcomes. So yes, we want diverse livestock in this country and globally. But there is this very strong narrative right now to eat less meat. And mostly that's coming out of climate science. So I think there's been this oversimplification of taking this climate science we have, which is pretty good because we're taking empirical measurements of atmospheric levels of greenhouse gases. But then we're overly simplifying the conclusion there, and we're coming to this conclusion of, well, livestock are a source of methane and greenhouse gas emissions, so therefore eat less meat. But it's it's just simply not that simplistic, because we know that animals, and especially grasslands, so maybe not everywhere in this country, more out west, but just grassland in general around the world, they co-evolved with animals. And so we need to sustain these animal populations. And we don't really have the numbers that we used to have, like just in the wild. So we do really need to maintain our livestock populations, because, if they're on the land, then as you were saying, Kip, like they should be sequestering carbon. If they're managed properly, I'll just put that caveat in there, because I think we also are seeing some degradation happening because the management isn't, it's not through holistic management or regenerative agriculture. So, and if that's not happening, then we'll see soil erosion through wind and water, and that will actually become a carbon emission. So I think the management aspect of any meat we're eating, whether it's a lamb, sheep, or cattle, it's really about how those animals were managed. So I'm definitely not would never promote someone to eat less meat. I would say though, eat better meat that is more in line with how animals should be raised, and how they should be managed. And it really, at the end, it's really like biomimicry. We're kind of, they need to be managed in a way that biomimics the way that these natural herds, of bison used to roam this land. Then there's this other aspect that people, I think, possibly don't talk about, and it goes back to like this oversimplification, because we have nutrition as well, like what is good for human health. And we can't make health decisions based off of climate science, because to me, like that's illogical. Why would we put our health at jeopardy, and the health of our species? And we're seeing these chronic illnesses increase as well. And why would we take out this very nutritious food that we have available to us in order to save ourselves? So there's like a bit of an illogical argument there for me anyway. So I'm a big proponent of just eating meat. And then especially lamb, especially in the United States, because as Anne's saying, and as you are, you're raising sheep and lamb, you have a diverse herd, and the best thing you can do is support your local farmers. And I know that's not always easy for everyone. I was living in New York City for past 10 years, and during COVID, I moved out to Pennsylvania. So the way that I buy is very different now. I'd have to be a bit more creative and go to whole animal butchers and find like meat subscriptions where there was some companies connecting with local farmers upstate in New York. And now I have the opportunity to actually go to farms and figure out where to get that meat that's aligned with my values and, how I'm thinking about sustainability. So that's all to say. I think we should.
Yeah, it's fun. Foraging, sourcing ingredients, finding farms that treat their animals and their land well and produce great tasting food in finding different places of the countryside. It's just really a fun thing to do. So not only are you sourcing great ingredients, you're having a great time while you're doing it. So Megan, I just kind of related to this. I remember you saying from the work you did in Uruguay that the farmers there call themselves grass farmers, and I'm intrigued by that. Why do they do that?
Yeah, so this has been pretty common. So it's actually in Argentina was probably where I first heard it. I've never been to Uruguay, although I'd love to go there. Heard it's lovely. So, and just a little bit of a background, when I was working at EILEEN Fisher, we had very progressive sustainability goals. And when we got to the fiber of wool, we were a little bit at a loss. So we were like, what is sustainable wool? We were very focused on the animal welfare piece, but we knew there was this land management aspect that we needed to learn more about. And that led me to Argentina, New Zealand, Australia, meeting with probably over 20 ranches and soil scientists. And that's where I got this really fantastic education on what regenerative agriculture is and holistic management. And it was very common, and still to this day, people still tell me, I'm a grass grower, and it's kind of amazing. It's just, it shifts your perspective of what you're farming for. It's not just, or what you're ranching for. It's not just for the meat product or the wool, but you're really sustaining an ecosystem. And you have all these different like interconnected things that are happening. So you want to essentially have an outcome where you have the ecosystem that's thriving, it's regenerating, where the health of the soil is increasing. And that one of the best indicators of that is that you will just grow more grass on your property, on your land. And when you have more grass, that means you don't have to buy feed. So immediately your costs go down. So you're not bringing in outside feed into your ecosystem. You're just growing your own feed there. And then when you grow the amount of grass that you just have more food. So what we're seeing is that regenerative farmers are literally growing their carrying capacity of their land. And when you do that, you can put more animals on the land. So now you're growing your profitability. And it's sort of this virtuous cycle: more animals, more grass. And then that means more profit for the farmer. So, and I know it's a little bit simplified. Not every rancher will just, implement holistic management and then see that in year one. There's definitely a process, and there's hurdles and there's challenges, but that's the idea. And we've seen it enough now at several farms, several in Argentina, especially through my work that I did at EILEEN Fisher, that it feels like that does need to be like the way that we start thinking about ranching and farming, and that we approach sustainability, at least from the fashion world, when we talk about fibers, as like truly triple bottom line. Because I mean, we've been talking about that concept for so many years now in sustainability, but we haven't always thought about it for our suppliers. And I think this is the first solution where that all just became connected, where the farmers are more profitable, they're happier, they're increasing the functioning and the health of their ecosystem in which they're managing. And so that's why they call themselves grass growers. It's all about the grass.
Yeah, there was this at a conference in Stanford in 2019, the predecessor organization to Werewolf New London, which was called Till Biofashion Tech. The keynote speaker was Dave Montgomery and his wife Ann Bickley, and they had this phrase, which is, "Fashion should begin and end with the soil." Mm-hmm. And that really stuck with me. Anyway, Ann, I saw your head nodding while Megan was talking, so I just, from the perspective of a farmer, I have to say, you're running along I think it's the Post Road in Guilford, looking for the turnoff to Olympia Farm. You would say to yourself, can there possibly be a sheep farm here? And it's tucked away, but you're there, and it's amazing. And I think somebody told me that there are 400 sheep farms in Connecticut.
Cool. I didn't know that, but that's good.
And a lot of them are kind of hidden, and finding them is a cool thing. So anyway, from your perspective, this idea of grass farming and the soil and the rest of it.
Yeah, well, I guess a couple of things that Megan was saying really made me, they really resonated. So one was when we bought the place that we bought, it was not a farm. It was just a not very nice place that needed a lot of work, and there were a lot of trees. And I always hate cutting down trees. I find it really bothersome. And so each time we had to clear more land, I just felt like maybe I was hurting the earth a little bit, until my husband pointed out to me that as we cleared the land and we created more open space, more grass, we created this amazing habitat for songbirds. Songbirds live, many of them, in meadows. I mean, we have more bluebirds than you can shake a stick at. Bluebirds and goldfinches and cardinals and house finches and Baltimore Orioles. I mean, you name, red-winged blackbirds. We just have, and many, many birds that I don't know. We have a great heron that regularly comes and visits our pond. It's amazing, and just the sounds from the birds have been joyful to me. But it took me a while to understand that it was by creating pasture, we also created a habitat for another population that's really in trouble and really needs help and support and regeneration. So that was one piece that really resonated for me. And the other is, you know, we're really small. We have 10 acres. Now, for a property on Route 1 in Guilford, that's pretty nice. But for a farm, that's pretty small. The more grass, the more open space, the more pasture we create, the more we can responsibly increase our carrying capacity, because the animals are going through, we do rotational grazing, which means they move from one pasture to the next, thereby allowing the pastures that they've just chewed down to regenerate and grow and be strong and healthy. So, so when Megan was talking about when you grow more grass, you increase your carrying capacity, I agree 100%.
So, Anne, you raised Romneys, and I think, and you've been, I think you've been president of the Connecticut Romney Breeders Association and so forth. And so, obviously you like the breed, and I'm just curious as to why Romneys.
Because they're the best breed. I know other people have mistakenly said that about their breed on your show, but no. When, you know, I came to farming as an adult, and I've had a lifelong love of sheep. And when the opportunity presented itself to actually be able to start raising sheep, I did my homework and I read up on them. And the first thing that struck me about Romneys were how pretty they were. To me, they looked the way, in my mind, a sheep ought to look. And then I learned about their mothering abilities and how they are, for sheep, pretty mellow and pretty deep thinkers for sheep. They also have a fantastic fleece. And at the time that we were able to start raising animals, I had recently learned how to spin. And so one of the things that was really attractive was their fleece is great for hand spinners because it's long, it's lustrous, it's just very easy to spin. So as a beginner spinner, I thought, that's awesome. I want 2 sheep, a white sheep and a black sheep. That's all I'll ever need. I'll have enough to spin. Then I can knit it and life will be good. Well, that was 20 something years ago, and I have a few more than 2. And now we've got the farm, and we raise yarn and we raise meat, et cetera, et cetera. But really,
is that some of your yarn behind you?
It is some of my yarn behind me. That's some of the natural gray that is organically spun for me up at Green Mountain Spin. I didn't spin this. Green Mountain Spinnery, just over the line in Vermont, where they use organic processing, spun it for me. But you know, like, I made the decision to go with Romneys, and each year I have them, I just love them more and more. It's a great breed. And they're of the long wool breeds. Romney has a long staple. It's about 6 inches long.
Wow.
Of the long wool breeds, they've got the finest wool. And there's a connection between a coarser wool, a longer wool, and a finer meat. So it's this great combination of a fleece that's really usable, really durable, nice, really shiny, and then a meat that's really tender and that you want to eat.
Yeah, I had a leg of lamb from your farm when we were doing that video, and you gave me that recipe where you put garlic and olive oil and rosemary, I think, in a plastic bag with the frozen leg of lamb, and just let it marinate for 5 days as it thaws out. And it was incredible. It was a great.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, no, I did it. It was really awesome. So Megan, what is sustainable fashion?
Oof, tough question, Kip. Well, for me, someone who has, like, I just value nature so much and the potential of it. I stay on the side of, like, natural fibers are going to be the solution. I'm not too into some of these, like, innovative novelty fibers that have typically unintended consequences and often have greenwashed claims. But I mean, I love what you said earlier around what David Montgomery was talking about, the soil to soil idea. And that's how I think of the most idealistic picture of fashion. It's something that's from the soil and that can go back. So, you know, not that this is happening at any sort of scale, but, you know, with the appearance of the fiber shed, different associations, the different fiber sheds around the country, I think we're starting to see more localized production. And that typically means natural fibers that are processed close to where the fibers were grown and harvested, natural dyes, if they're dyed at all, or as the yarn that's behind Anne, you can mix these different colors to get like a whole array of, like, beautiful natural colors. And then basically creating something that eventually can go back to the soil. And I think that's where we need to head, like, in that direction, because right now, just we look at globally, just fashion, we're way overproducing. And just be really clear, we don't have an overconsumption problem, it's an overproduction problem. And around 70% of all the fibers that are produced annually are synthetic, the bulk of that being polyester. And I understand that synthetic fibers can be, you know, useful in certain situations for form and function, especially for athletic wear, but we're just way overproducing with these polyester yarns. And the other aspect, though, is that I don't think there is this, like, perfectly sustainable garment out there, unless it's maybe one you made yourself. But what I tend to do is, like, look at brands and try to be a realist. We have huge brands in the world. They're not going anywhere tomorrow. But there are some that have this huge power. They have a lot of money. They have a loud voice, and they can do certain projects, or they can change their supply chain, or they can take on some of these initiatives that could really move the needle. And then you're going to have some smaller brands who are able to be more nimble, and they're going to be able to probably do, you know, get fiber from a specific farm or ranch and support that and have that storytelling ability. And those are the types of brands and just types of garments that I think people should support. And, like, just for me personally, like, I don't support fast fashion. Like, I won't buy it from there, even if they have, you know, an organic cotton t-shirt, because I think the price structure, the way that they are overproducing every year is just inherently not a sustainable business practice. So I think just when it comes to sustainable fashion, it's your own personal value set. I mean, I know some people who think that secondhand is the most sustainable, and they could, for them, that's probably true, and that's great, and they should continue doing that. But I think we need diverse strategies. You know, we need to embrace the natural fibers, embrace secondhand, and also, even though I'm not so keen on some of these innovative fibers out there, I'm very happy to see there's a lot of innovation happening on the recycling side to that end of the useful life. We have a lot of garments out in the world that are not only synthetic, but they're hybrid. So it's synthetic and then natural fibers, you know, woven or knit together. So we have, like, a lot of cotton poly blends, and they're not very recyclable. So we do need better technologies and more infrastructure in place so that we can actually recycle these materials at scale. And then lastly, yeah, just going back a little bit to the natural fibers, the reason I tend to just be such an advocate for natural fibers is because they have this huge potential to give back. So we can manage sheep in a regenerative way. So that wool, the fact that we're using that wool and that meat from that ranch means that rancher has the opportunity to draw down carbon, to increase biodiversity, to have more healthy soil, and that's the potential of a natural fiber. And same with cropping, maybe not to the extent of animal agriculture, but you can farm in a way that betters the soil over time and continues to draw down that carbon, and that reduces emissions, so that we're not creating so much soil erosion, basically, and all this monoculture, very chemical intense agriculture. We have the potential to switch from that to something more regenerative and organic.
Well, one of the things to me that recommends wool is its long use phase. It just lasts longer than other fabrics, and you don't have to wash it as much. So, yeah. And it doesn't shed microplastics, but
so it does shed, though. I mean, the microplastic issue is definitely a huge issue, and it's the synthetics that are to blame, because you're right, they're the ones that are not biodegrading. But wool does shed, and it doesn't quite degrade as quickly as you would expect it to in a marine environment. But it does compost. It really needs to go back to the soil. But I agree with you 100% on the washability. I mean, you don't need to wash it as much, but also, just for anyone watching who likes to buy wool garments, make sure it's 100% wool. Because as soon as you mix in nylon or polyester, it doesn't really have that same breathability or odor resistance anymore, just because synthetics pick up odor so strongly and quickly. But yeah, I'm a huge advocate of wool garments. I think wool makes up only 1% of all of the fiber that's produced every year. I would love to see that at least double. I think we need a lot more wool in our lives.
Yeah, more than double. Okay, so Anne, your thoughts on that?
Well, let me add one other way that wool adds to a positive about wool is the manure from the sheep makes a fantastic base to compost. So when we clean out our barn, we compost. We don't buy commercial fertilizers. And I know it's not like our farm is not alone in that. You can really amend your soil. You can really help your soil and create a much healthier soil by including sheep manure in your compost. Wool tags the dirty bits, the parts that you don't want to spin or knit with or wear, have some great qualities as well. I can't speak at great length about it, but I have given many wool tags to dirt farmers who are trying to increase the quality of their soil, because they like to take the waste wool and actually work it into their dirt,
right,
to bring the dirt back to life. And then finally, we have a greenhouse on the farm, and we do hydroponics. And I was appalled when my husband was talking about buying a chemical compound that had the name wool in it, and it had nothing to do with wool at all. And it was to start the seeds in as they're floating around in the hydroponic tanks, rock wool. And I thought, why can't you just use regular wool? Why can't you take some of my waste wool and grow the seeds in that? So he very quickly changed, and we now do that as well. So we really try to use the wool in all its beautiful and not so beautiful aspects as well. And it kind of all goes back in to that whole cycle.
Yeah, on this subject of sheep poop, I've heard it called gardener's gold. Have you heard that phrase? Yeah.
I haven't, but it sure is.
Yeah, no, it's really great compost and soil enhancer. So it's cool. So do the two of you have any questions of each other?
Yes.
Okay, go.
I have one for Megan. So Megan, I love to hear you talking about sustainability and even smaller, more nimble niche market companies being able to buy from certain farms or certain types of wool. How do we increase that? How do we get fashion, the fashion industry? You know, we've got the American Wool Council, and that's awesome. We've got American Sheep Industry Association, fantastic. But for the small breeders, which is what you really see in Connecticut and the rest of New England, how do we connect fashion to artisan yarn farmers so that it becomes a win for the farmers, it becomes a win for the companies, and it becomes a win for the consumer and ultimately for the earth? How do we make that happen?
Yeah, I'm so happy you asked that, because this is on my mind a lot as well. And it's one of the reasons I'm just so happy to see fiber shed really flourishing, because the trick in the textile supply chains, which are often pretty long and complex supply chains, is matching up timing and the minimums that are required to process. So for what's small for one brand is tiny to another, and then huge to somebody else. And oftentimes, like we get stuck, at least from what I've experienced, is that like, oh, that minimum is too high, or that we don't actually have enough fiber to fulfill that order. So it's kind of like marrying that up to find the right producers for the right brands or designers. So that's why I think it works really well when ranchers can kind of pull their wool together, not necessarily mix it up. Because I know in the United States, I think there's this huge untapped potential around embracing different breeds of sheep and kind of celebrating what you were talking about earlier, like the length of the fiber, the stable length, the micron, and like just what that fiber can do in different situations. But still, figuring out a way to come together as a group or some sort of cooperative that can sell that wool to a processor who can process that amount of wool, but then also with some sort of brand or designer at the end of the chain who can use that. Now, the other thing that has to happen though, and I think we're starting to see a change, is that brands need to invest in the beginning of their supply chain. So for the first, I started in the fashion industry in 2014, and for really my entire time at EILEEN Fisher, which was around 6 to 7 years, I was very focused on supply chain transparency, and really was told when I started, you're here to map the supply chain. And which is kind of funny, that's why I'm laughing a little bit, is because the supply chains are so dynamic. They change within the design season, let alone several times during the year. And so I quickly realized that we have to change the way that we're buying materials, the way that we're designing materials. And rather than designing a garment, we need to design the supply chain alongside the design of that garment. So I think we're starting to see this a little bit, where instead of just going to your factory and having that one relationship and saying, make this sweater for me, and then they do all the legwork to source from the yarn spinner and whoever else, and they're buying off the commodity market. It's really deciding, okay, I want this outcome for the environment from the fiber that I'm buying, and where can I find that? Is it with Anne in Connecticut and her Romney sheep for what I'm doing? Maybe I want to do a chunky yarn and I want it to be undyed. And then building around that and building around the kind of the boundaries of just what will be produced that year. And these brands have money too. So this is where I would love to see a lot more investment from brands into more long-term or forward contracts to actually either take ownership or at least do some sort of commitment at a fiber level with a farmer or rancher. And then from there, it's a little bit easier to say, okay, I have this fiber, and now I need to figure out the rest of the supply chain. And it won't be perfect. It's not like they're going, even Rebecca Burgess from Fiber Shed, when she was trying to do the backyard hoodie, they still had to go, I think, outside of their mile range that they wanted to get the yarn spun. And I don't think we should let perfection be the enemy of good for any of this that we're doing, because we simply do not have infrastructure in this country. It's so limited. We really need to show that not only do we have demand, but we have the willingness to implement these projects, and we're willing to invest in our supply chains so that people can actually feel that support is there to build that infrastructure, build more yarn mills, more knitting mills, weaving mills, and even garment production. I mean, I know we have a lot of garment production in LA and some in New York, but we could use more. We had I'm using the collective we, but there's a new high-tech knitting mill that just opened up in St. Louis last year, and I think that's fantastic. We need a lot more of that to make it easier, because it shouldn't really be this hard to make a sustainable garment, but it is right now.
All right. Did that answer the question, Ann?
It answered it mostly. It answered it in a big picture, strategic kind of way. But then when we get down to tactical and actually making it happen, what are the next steps? Like, what do we do? What can I as a shepherd do?
Are you part of, there's a Connecticut Fiber Shed, right? Are you part of that?
I am connected with them.
Yeah.
Because they're connected with Connecticut sheep breeders. So I'm connected with them and I'm in touch with them.
Yeah, I think that's one good start. It's not the solution, but it's one good start. I think also just being connected with yarn spinners is really important, and not just the local ones. Maybe some of the bigger guys, and so basically you could say to them, I have this local regenerative solution for a customer of yours that may want this, and just to make sure that other processors are aware that you exist and that you have this ability to get wool into their hands that their customers are asking for. What I've seen, just like personally through my work at both EILEEN Fisher and at Ralph Lauren, is that we have a lot of suppliers coming to us with solutions that they've come up with based on what they're seeing through demand. And it's not always quite right. And there is quite a bit of greenwashing, and just that's a little harsh. There's a lot of miseducation around what sustainable materials brands are really looking for that are authentically sustainable, where they have positive outcomes. So I think the more that brands can talk to the processors and the ranches can talk to the processors, like I think that's where we need probably more communication and relationships. And then the other thing would just be reaching out to brands if you have access to that. I don't know exactly how that would work, but just as someone who works in sustainability, I get a lot of people who send me sales emails. If someone from a ranch or a farm sent me an email, though, I would probably perk up and be like, oh, I will definitely look at this, because it's really hard to make that connection, being at a global brand. And we're kind of always looking to have that connection. And then I'll also just say again, connecting with other people in your area or creating a network. The reason I said that was not only because you're going to have a higher volume and more options for a customer, but you're also lowering your customer's risk. Because, for example, if as a brand we were going to source cotton from one farm that we thought was fantastic, they're organic, and they had crop failure that year, that puts us sort of in a jam from a brand perspective. Now, if we're working with maybe 10 farmers in one area who are growing organically, and they're not all the same, but they're all kind of aligned on sustainability and seeing continuous improvement year over year, and one has a crop failure, then that lessens that risk a lot. Brands that what I've noticed, at least the larger brands, are very risk adverse. And And smaller brands sometimes, like I said, like they can be a bit more nimble. One project, for example, that I think is fantastic that was launched earlier this year, end of last year, was Mara Hoffman. They did a collaboration with fiber sheds. So they use climate beneficial wool for some of their sweater garments. And they're beautiful. They're undyed. The wool's, I believe, from California. I may have gotten that wrong. Yeah, I mean, so we're seeing this kind of localized production approach, which I do think we'll start to see more options for producers like yourself. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's like some website to go on right now to say like, I have wool, who wants it? Maybe there is that I'm unaware of.
Great. Hey, so I wanted to kind of finish up by asking you both sort of a cosmic question that can be grounded in what we've talked about or not. And that is simply, what's your hope for the world? So, Anne, have you thought about that?
I think about it all the time. Yes. Well, I want to leave it a better place for my grandchildren than it is right now. And I think if we all acted a little bit more like sheep, which are not aggressive and not trying to take over the world, they're just trying to graze their own patch. I think we'd be leaving the world in a much better place.
Somebody told me once that the stone walls around Connecticut, which were all boundaries of sheep pastures, and they're not very high, they're maybe 3 feet. And the reason why you didn't have to make them too high, because unlike goats, sheep won't climb over a wall to get to the other side if the grass on their side is good, right? They'll just stay where they are. There's no reason to go over the wall. And there is kind of a logic to that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're cool. And I'm with you. Everything I do is to answer the question, how can I leave the world a better place for my 3 granddaughters? That's really all I think about. And I've just decided the rest of my life, I'm only going to work on projects that can make a significant impact on decarbonizing the economy, because I think if we don't do that, they're not going to have a good world to live in. So anyway, Megan, what do you think? What's your hope for the world?
So I think about this a lot too. So my answer for today, I think my hope is that we can be better critical thinkers. I think there's a lot of narratives out in the world right now that are sort of these like global narratives, and they might be fine, but they may not apply to everyone in this like nuanced regional context. So I think everyone just needs to really like think critically about how they can best participate to see these outcomes that we want to see around sustainability and carbon and decarbonizing the economy. And in part of that, so maybe I have like 2 answers here, is I think we need to be better about how we value nature. And that includes like the beauty of nature. And I think sometimes we get too tunnel visioned on certain impact categories like carbon. It can be a bit of a distraction sometimes, and we're still seeing declines in habitat and ecosystems. And there's a lot of beauty in that to just embrace and value. And I think if we put our value on that aspect of the environment and sustainability, I think we would probably see very good outcomes from that.
I read a statistic somewhere that a lot of the remaining open space that's not in public hands, that's in private hands, is in dairy farms. And the dairy industry has been going through such turmoil. It's just able to produce a lot more milk with a lot less land. Whether it's better milk or not is a good question. But a lot of dairy farms have gone out of business, and it strikes me that one solution for them, and one way to preserve that open space is to convert the dairy farms to sheep farms, or a mix of dairy and sheep.
Yeah.
So that's another way in which sheep can save the world, basically. So, any last thoughts either of you have that you're burning to get out that we haven't covered?
I love how you just ended that last statement. Sheep can save the world. I agree.
Yeah, wear wool, eat lamb, basically. Just keep doing that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.